Good morning and welcome. Thank you for coming to my talk on the server management add-on. Hope you all had a fabulous night at Data Night Out. I'd like to start by asking a couple questions. Who in here is a Tableau Server administrator? Wonderful. You are all the unsung heroes of your organization, helping maximize the impact of Tableau, and you're my customers. Thank you very much. Second question. How many of you have opened a viz and seen the spinner and wondered, why does it take so long? Or have one of your users come to you and said, server's really slow, I can't really do my work. So I'm very excited to preview and show you a set of capabilities that we've introduced called the Server Management Add-on to address some of these problems and more. Before we get started, a brief introduction about myself. My name is Hemant Srinivas. Everyone calls me H. I've been with Tableau for 6 years. I'm a director of engineering, and I've worked in the server space my whole time at Tableau. And these days, my teams run everything that's underneath the covers. So imagine the administrative experience, installations, upgrades, licensing, security, performance, monitoring, things like that. So today, I want to first talk and give a holistic overview of what the server management add-on is. We're going to start by addressing the 5 canonical who, what, when, where, why questions. Then I'll actually go and walk through each of the features in the initial release, followed by a deeper dive of 2 new tools, the content management tool and the resource monitoring tool. If you caught the Devs on Stage keynote yesterday morning, they previewed this. I'm planning to go into a little more detail about some of the options with both of those tools. I'll give you a quick preview of what we're thinking about and some things upcoming in the coming quarterly releases, and leave enough time for Q&A at the end. So let's start at the 30,000-foot level, the server management add-on. The 5 W's are simply who, what, when, where, why. I think it's important to set some context around why we built this and who it's designed for before we go into the specifics of the features. So the who, by and large, is for you all, the administrators of Tableau, right? We really want to focus a set of additional or enhanced capabilities to help you, the admin, be better and do better and maximize the resources that you have available for your Tableau server deployment. When is easy. The first version came out in 2019.3, and we'll be adding new functionality for every quarterly release moving forward. So the where question doesn't really apply here, but they're the 5 whys, so I have to talk about them. So the where is simply twofold. One, the server management add-on is an additional license. So it will stack on top of your existing, whether you have perpetual or named users, or if you've converted to subscriptions, it will be a license that's stacked on top of that. The availability is simply, for the 2 tools, is on all the normal download channels. What I would say is, please reach out to your account manager or sales rep to talk about the specific tactical nitty-gritty of next steps if you're interested in this. I just call out here that it's the 2 tools are available for download, and it is an additional license. Okay, let's talk about why. This is pretty important here. We found time and time again that how Tableau grows in an organization is what we call land and expand. And you may have experienced this as well, where Tableau starts out with a desktop. One evangelist, someone who's using Tableau desktop, really finds the value in it. And soon they spread the word, and their team or group, a few users are using desktop, and now they want to start enabling some collaboration. So that's where Tableau Server or Tableau Online come into play. And as Tableau has taken off in an organization, soon thereafter, multiple groups, departments, organizations may want to onboard with Tableau Server. And what you'll quickly find then is there's a Tableau Server administrator who has to deal with a lot of different use cases, a lot of different requests, security, compliance, and all sorts of other things that the administrator has to deal with. So we felt that there are some additional capabilities that we wanted to give these rapidly growing deployments and help them on their Tableau journey. And then the what is pretty simple because it's the rest of the presentation. So let's go into that. The Server Management add-on provides advanced capabilities in 3 main areas: security, scalability, and manageability. In 2019.3, the 5 main features are what you see on the screen. The subsequent slides, I'll go through each of these in more detail, but I'll note here that the 2 with the asterisk next to it are unlocked and enabled when your Tableau Server deployment is hosted or is on AWS, is on the public cloud AWS. So I should pause and talk about why that's the case. There are a couple main reasons. First, Tableau Online is hosted in AWS. And internally, it provides a really good testing ground for us to really make sure that this functionality will meet our users' needs. Second, approximately 70% of Tableau Server deployments that are hosted in the public cloud are on AWS at this point. So we felt it was good bang for our buck to start with AWS. However, if you're deployed in Azure or GCP or another cloud provider, never fear, we have it on our roadmap to bring parity to those other public cloud providers. So for example, with AWS Key Management, Google has its own key management service called Cloud Key Management Service. Azure offers something called Key Vault. These are capabilities within each of those respective public clouds, and we will bring Tableau Server integration with them in the coming quarterly releases. So let's start and talk about each of these features. The first is what we call AWS Key Management. And there are a couple prerequisites to this. In 2019.3, we actually released another feature called encryption at rest, which was a widely requested feature from a variety of customers to help encrypt the extracts that are on the local disk and provide enhanced security. So if you enable or enforce encryption at rest on your server, and your server is deployed in AWS, we now offer you the option to integrate with AWS's Key Management service. This provides a couple benefits. So I'm not going to go into detail about exactly what's happening here. This is essentially how, this is the sequence of keys that are used to encrypt your extracts locally. There's a separate talk that goes into great detail about this. But what I do want to call out is the fact that the red box in the upper left, that is the root master key that is stored externally, that is stored in AWS KMS itself. So what this allows is for increased security by separating who has access to AWS KMS from the local drive permissions. It's essentially an additional security layer on top of encryption at rest. The second benefit provided is what we call BYOK, or bring your own key. Many of you may actually already have some sort of encryption key that you use and some policies around that. AWS KMS offers both options. It will generate a key for you, or it will allow you to import your own key and still enjoy the benefits of that separation. And lastly, AWS KMS offers industry-leading compliance. It is FedRAMP certified, FIPS, HIPAA, various ISO standards, and it meets many large enterprises' compliance and security requirements. Next, I want to talk about what we call external RDS Postgres support. So the screenshot here is not that exciting, but what I do want to call out here is if you have your Tableau server deployed in AWS, we now offer you the ability to use Amazon's RDS Postgres as opposed to the Postgres that is installed with your Tableau server deployment. So Tableau Server has always come with Postgres, and as a quick recap, Postgres stores lots and lots of information about your users, permissions, extract, refresh schedules, and it's largely a source of truth of your Tableau server. Now, if you're deployed in AWS, we offer the ability to integrate with RDS. Why would we want to do this? There are several benefits. First, RDS comes with multi-availability zone HA solution. So as you're configuring your RDS instance, you can configure it for high availability. And as a side benefit, it has guarantees in terms of how long it will take to fail over. It has guarantees in terms of its uptime, latency, and your performance. You can actually configure it on the RDS side. So I summarized some of the specifics, but largely there's a lot of scalability, reliability, and built-in security that RDS gives you for free, that Amazon RDS offers as their managed service. So we're now giving you the option to leverage that. And if you're a customer that has a larger deployment with lots of metadata, it is an option to consider using RDS to help manage some of those performance implications. We offer a CLI command to essentially move from your local repository up to RDS and back. So once you configure RDS, you can choose to move it there. If at any point you need to move it back, there are CLI commands that let you go back and forth. Next, I want to talk about something called Workload Management. This is actually two different features, and I'm going to start with the backgrounders aspect. So this is a busy image, but all this is simply showing is the topology of a multi-node cluster. And what I want us to focus on are the nodes in the middle. And if you'll note here, there are backgrounders on these nodes. You may have something analogous deployed in your own environments, where you've separated out backgrounders to handle the extract refreshes. What we're offering with the Server Management add-on is the ability to specify job types per node for those backgrounders. Which means now you can specify, if you have 2 nodes of backgrounders and you have a lot of extract refreshes, you can now specify perhaps node 3 does only extract refreshes and node 4 does subscriptions and flows and everything else. Essentially what we want is to offer you the ability to maximize the resources you have at your control. If you recall, backgrounders is essentially sequential. Anything that needs to be refreshed, anything that needs to go through backgrounder just gets queued up. With this new capability, you have more control over how the backgrounders are being used. The second part of workload management is what we call for file store. So I'll go back to the same exact image that I showed on the previous slide. And now I want to focus on nodes 1 and 2. If you look here, this has both VizQL Server and file store. This is common. But this could also be a source of resource contention, as they are both CPU-intensive operations. So one thing to consider is moving the file stores to a separate node away from your VizQL server. This is to eliminate some potential resource contention. And now, if you're able to do that, you can specify job types for the file store. So if you have an extract query heavy deployment, this is a performance optimization that you can turn on, which again maximizes the resources available to you with your own file store. Next, I want to spend some time going into more detail about the content migration tool. And I'm going to do a live demo. So hopefully the demo gods are with me. So bear with me while I log in here. Okay, perfect. Okay, so the scenario is this, right? The content migration tool, at its heart, is a tool to help you migrate content from a source to a destination. And when I talk about content, I'm talking right now about about workbooks and data sources. At present, it doesn't migrate users, it doesn't migrate custom views and things like that. That is some feedback that we're hearing, and we're going to take that into account for our roadmap. For right now, though, it is primarily designed for moving workbooks and data sources. You may need to move it from either project A to project B. You may need to move it from site A to site B. You may even need to move it from server A to server B. It has the flexibility to handle all these things. Another scenario where you may need to use this is if you have a globally distributed cluster. And if you need to sync content between a Tableau Server cluster in North America and one in EMEA and one in APAC, this is a tool that will help make that easy. So here I have a Tableau Server. And if you look in the top left, I'm in my sandbox site. So imagine that this is a site where all of your users are going to develop their visualizations, they're going to develop their dashboards. And if I click Explore, I have a sandbox project, which is fine. And there are a few different, for the purpose of the demo, samples. And I have something called real estate. And in real estate, if I open up this visualization, what you're going to see in the top right-hand side is the beta template. Right? And this was what we showed during Devs on Stage. This is to signify that this is still a work in progress and not to be treated as the final dashboard. And if I go back to my sandbox project and hover over real estate, you'll see there's a tag that says approved. So this sets the baseline for saying this is a workbook that is ready to be migrated. Let's go ahead and migrate it to a different site. So I also have the content migration tool open. I'll try to zoom in here. Sorry. And like I said, the content migration tool helps you move from source to a destination. Could be the same server, could be different servers. And essentially, the tool is designed to be very sequential, and you follow a set of steps. If this happens to be something that you'll need to do repeatedly, you can actually save the steps that you've done and just apply that multiple times. So we call that a plan. You can actually just save the plan and reuse it as often as you want. So what I want to do is walk you through some of the options when you migrate content, both workbooks and data sources. So here we have the Tableau server. We're going to choose the source, which is this server, my demo server that I have up. I've logged in with the username and password. And essentially, my source is going to be the sandbox site. My destination is going to be the same server, but a different site called production. With that, I'm going to walk you through each of the steps and show you some of the options available. So first, you have to choose your project. So I only had one. I have two projects in my sandbox site, default and sandbox. I'm going to choose sandbox. And once I do that, this is where, let me zoom in a little. This is where you can specify which workbooks to move. You can either choose to move all the workbooks. You can manually go ahead and choose a specific workbook. Or you can choose a workbook based off of a rule. And this is where if the tag approved is a rule or is a scenario you can envision, we're going to go ahead and move workbooks that are tagged with approved. So, So going right along, let me actually go ahead and zoom in on the left-hand side and talk about the pane for a second. So if you look on the left-hand side, this essentially shows you the steps that you can take and the actions you can take with both workbooks and data sources. Like I mentioned before, it's very sequential. So you first select the workbook or data source. You then do a mapping, followed by a transformation, and then some options. So with workbooks, essentially the mapping that we're going to do is we're going to change the project, and we're going to go from the sandbox project on my sandbox site to a project called Certified on my production site. And if I click here, there are other mappings that you can do. You may want to rename workbooks. Perhaps you use some sort of in-progress naming scheme and a different naming scheme when it's live in production. There are a few different options here for you to choose from. For us, we're just going to go ahead and map the change project. And now I'm going to move to the next transformation. So for the purposes of the demo, the scenario is where I want to replace the beta image that we saw on the top right corner to something called Certified. So there is an option to add this transformation called Replace Image. If I click on the drop-down, however, you'll see that there are a lot of different options for you to consider. Okay, so my point here is that there's a lot of flexibility and options to hopefully cater to your specific scenario. There's some functionality here to provide that flexibility, whether it's removing tooltips, whether it's replacing text. There's options here. One important aspect is data source transformation. So I don't have data source transformations on this demo, but it's common when you're working in Sandbox, you're pointing to some test database. And when you move to production, you're pointing to a production database. And that database may have different credentials. This tool allows you to change those connections, change the connection information when you do this migration. So if I go ahead and, too much. I click on Add Transformation, there is an option to set your connection info. This allows you to change both your database and the connection info there. If you need to set some custom SQL, you can do that. Perhaps your production database or your database has a different schema. You may need to change the name of that. There's some functionality and options built in here for that. And this is all just sequential and building on top of each other. And then last, there are some Workbook Publish options. So you can choose to, for example, overwrite newer workbooks or not. You can choose to copy the extract refresh schedules. So if you need something refreshed after the migration, you can choose that option. You can choose to copy the workbook permissions if the mapping is okay. And there are other options in terms of adding tags or removing tags. Again, there's just functionality here that hopefully will apply to your own scenario. And then if I click next, it'll actually take you through the data sources. This specific demo doesn't have data sources, but it's essentially the same exact steps. That's why I kind of highlighted the sequential nature on the left-hand side. So I'm actually going to jump down to scripts and just make a brief comment here. You're also given the ability to specify scripts to run either before the migration or after the migration. Let me give you a couple examples. Perhaps you need to create a project on the destination side before content gets migrated, right? You could write a script in your language of choice, hitting our REST APIs that allows you to do that. Perhaps you need to delete the content from the source after the migration is done. It affords you yet another level of flexibility to hopefully cater to your needs. All of the content migration tool is built on our REST APIs. So a lot of the functionality you can actually script. And if you stop by the kiosk, I've talked to various customers who said, yes, we've done some subset of this ourselves. We've already scripted some subset of this. What this tool hopefully allows you to do is do it in an easier fashion, in a more repeatable fashion with greater flexibility. And last, if I click on plan options, there's some high-level options that you can choose. So one of the common questions that was asked at the kiosk was around what happens if it fails, and how does rollback work? So there's an option here to say, either continue the migration if a particular workbook or data source fails, or stop. So if you see a failure and you need to react to that before migrating en masse, you're allowed to do that. If you want to enable version control so that you can keep your previous versions, it allows you to do that as well. So when you've gone through these different options and you're ready to run, there's a review screen that kind of shows you exactly what is going to happen. So in this case, we're going from sandbox to production. We're going from the sandbox site. We're choosing a workbook with the tag approved, and we're not going to archive it. And then if I click run, that's fine. It will give you real-time information about what's happening here. So it'll tell you exactly which workbooks are being migrated and how often or how much time remains to complete the migration. In our case, the migration was successful. Hooray, the demo worked. But if there were outputs or errors or warnings, it would all be here for you to go investigate. So now if I go back to my Tableau server, I'll go ahead and go into my production site. I'll click Explore. And in my certified project, I have a real estate workbook. And if I open this workbook, I now have a certified image on the top right. So that, in a nutshell, is one scenario for the content migration tool. Currently, it is a Windows-based tool. Another common question has been around, can you schedule this? That is great feedback that we've heard. At present, it doesn't have the ability to schedule it, but it's on our roadmap, so we hope to add that functionality soon. And now, I want to flip back here and talk about the resource monitoring tool. So I want to switch gears a bit and go to the other tool that we offer as part of the server management add-on. So for an overview, the resource monitoring tool offers both broad system-level monitoring as well as the ability to do in-depth performance investigations into the behavior of your Tableau server. The diagram that you see on the slide essentially says there's two aspects to this. We recommend that you run what we call the master server for the resource monitoring tool on a separate machine, either VM or physical, so there's no contention with your actual Tableau server. And every node of your Tableau server will have a lightweight agent running on it. What this agent does is it captures physical information of the machine, so your CPU, your RAM usage, your I/O on your disk, as well as looking at all of the log activity that Tableau server generates, and it pushes it to the master server, where there's a lot of computation done to hopefully then give you insights in a web-based interface. So let me show you what that looks like. So now, here I'm logged into the master server, the web-based interface for the resource monitoring tool. And the first thing to note is that RMT is actually capable of monitoring multiple Tableau servers. For this demo, and for our demo purposes, I'm just showing one here, and it's called TC Showcase. The point of this initial view is to give you a high-level overview of what's happening on your server. Basically, what's the average CPU, what's your average concurrent user count, and most notably, if there are some alerts or actions that you may need to take, as indicated by the 1 here next to the name of the environment. If you had a multi-node deployment, you would see multiple lines, one for each node, that shows you the CPU usage for that node. So let's go ahead and let's click into this one alert that we have. The point of the RMT is to give you, the Tableau Server administrator, actionable insights into the behavior of the deployment. So this TC Showcase incidents page is essentially completely configurable by you, the administrator. So there are a variety of warnings or errors that you can specify to be alerted on if that threshold is met. So in this case here, this is a demo, but we have a warning for a specific view that took 45 minutes to load. That sounds problematic, and it's probably something that we need to go investigate. Perhaps you want to ensure that your C-level executives have a great experience when they're looking at Tableau Server. You can specify user-based incidents to really track the behavior or the experience for a particular user. You can specify different thresholds for refreshes, for viz loading, for CPU usage. My point with this is that it's very flexible based off what you believe is most critical for your deployment. I'm going to pop back up to the home screen, and I'm going to dive into, essentially, the overview of the server itself. Now, there's a lot going on in this particular screen, but I'll go through it one at a time. Your top left visualization here is essentially the performance of each node of your deployment. So this is where those lightweight agents that are capturing this information and sending it to the master server, this is where it gets bubbled up. So this is where you see what is your average CPU usage, what is your average memory usage, are there, is there latency in your I/O, and how much network bandwidth are you using? Purely system-based metrics. Then there's some specific information around Tableau's processes itself. You've all probably loaded off Resource Explorer. This will actually give you a view into, is backgrounder being pegged, or is VizQL Server being consuming an abnormal number of resources on your machine. Specific to backgrounder, it will also show you how many tasks have run in a histogram and some additional information on your extract refresh behavior. And I think the two more interesting ones are on the right-hand side, which show both the concurrent users on your Tableau server for a particular time period, as well as slow load times. So we're going to dig into this. Again, for the demo, if you, let me go ahead and zoom in here a bit more. You'll see that, okay, 5 seconds and 3 seconds is not a lot of time. But this is to indicate that there is a visualization that shows you that if there is a spike in load time, you may want to go investigate what's happening during that time. Everything in here is configurable based off of a filter that you can set for a time window. So you can keep looking at just the past hour, you can look at the past 8 hours, you can look at the past couple days. So if I go ahead and let's say I just kind of drag across load times, what that will do is it now zooms in on that time period, and it shows you what activity has been happening on the server during that time period. So we just covered some of the broad system level monitoring, and now we're going more into the detailed performance investigation. So the question that I asked in the beginning, how many of you have had users come to you and say, Tableau server is slow? What we're hoping to do is give you some actionable insights to figure out what's going on. So the first thing that you're going to see here is what are all the VizQL sessions that have happened during that time. And again, for the purposes of the demo here, there's nothing that looks abnormal, right? Like all the viz loads were a matter of seconds. But you can certainly imagine that if there was a spike or an abnormal activity, it will show up here to help you follow the rabbit hole down, like dig deeper and see what's going on. And there are various tabs up here to show you what's happening. So we just talked about VizQL server sessions. What's happening on your backgrounder at that time? What are all the queries that are happening on that time? What are the slowest views that are happening on that time? So there's some navigation and flexibility to help you figure out what's going on. Let's go back to VizQL sessions. Okay? If you click into a particular session ID, let's go ahead and choose this. Okay? Now, what this will show you is, again, more information. For this particular VizQL session, how long was the request? On average, on the right-hand side, what should it usually take? So this gives you a quick comparison to say, is this unusual or is this just a slow viz? If it's unusual, there's some deeper investigation to do. If it's a slow viz and it's always been slow, that's great insight, but perhaps there's a different action to take. So with this VizQL session, we can go and click on what were the requests that were made, what were the data queries. I mean, there are none in this case, but again, there's more information here. So then if I click into a specific request, if you follow the breadcrumbs, this is what I mean by following the rabbit hole down, right? So we were at a specific VizQL session, and now we're looking at a specific request of that session. So this is to show that you can keep following. This is all gathered from the logs, right? So this is the log information that Tableau Server generates that the RMT agent pushes to the master server, and it does a bunch of correlation to make your lives easier. Basically, finding this information before RMT was doable. It was just extraordinarily difficult. You would have to know exactly which logs to look at, open up multiple files, do some correlation, do some filtering and finding, and we're hoping to simplify all of that into one easily navigable view. The other thing I want to comment on is up top here. You can actually look at, so we can slice and dice based off of activity. You can also slice and dice based off of just the content that's on your server. So for example, if I click on projects up here from content, what this will show me is, okay, these are the various projects on my server. Which ones are being mostly used? Which ones are actually generating traffic and load on my server? So in this case here, my default project has nothing, but my Tableau samples has lots and lots of VizQL sessions, which for demo purposes makes sense. Sandbox also has a lot. So if I click into Sandbox, we go a little deeper. So now within Sandbox, here are the workbooks. How many VizQL servers, which workbooks are most popular? What are the people using? Okay, so I'm going to go back into that real estate one that I was talking about. And if I click on that, there we go. It goes back to a similar view that you saw before, but now you're slicing and dicing the data based off of a specific workbook. There's a summary in terms of the load times. There's a summary in terms of what are the slowest views. You can go and look at the VizQL sessions for this workbook. It's another way to analyze what's happening on your server. The reason that this is particularly interesting is because we've heard from a lot of customers the notion of chargeback. So you have multiple departments, and they're all using a central server. And there has to be some way of kind of figuring out how do you divvy up the cost. And we've heard this. So what I want to briefly highlight is we're still in beta, but we're introducing this notion of a chargeback report. So using all of this information that we're combing through, what we essentially offer you is a visualization, and I'll briefly highlight it here. I actually have it up. That's the kind of chargeback breakdown. And again, I have to caveat, this is still very much in beta. But I wanted to highlight this just because it is something that we hear repeatedly from customers. But this is a visualization that RMT will generate for you, where it gives you, it's a little hard to read, I apologize for that, but it gives you some flexibility to determine how you charge back to the various departments. There are some filters here, and again, for this, it's based off of this environment has these sites and the projects within that site, and you can specify weights, you can base it on load time, and there's some calculation here. So yet another way to hopefully help you, the Tableau Server administrator, take action and maximize the resources available at your disposal. Okay, so those are the 5 features in the Server Management add-on with 2019.3. What's next? This is an active area of investment for us. And this is something that we have to now carefully deliberate. And what I mean by that is we are absolutely going to continue putting new functionality and features into the base product, as well as adding functionality into the Server Management add-on. A couple of the ones that we're looking at right now are the following bullet points. So SAN support, for example, this is actually available in the 2020.1 beta. So this will allow you to specify, if you have a SAN or a NAS, it will allow you to save all of your extracts there and use something like snapshot backups, which SANs and NASs offer, to help with your disaster recovery story. We're actively looking into containerization. What does it mean to put Tableau Server or various processes in containers to help with auto-scaling? I mentioned that we are going to bring feature parity to both GCP and Azure. Resource governance is a thing that we always hear about, and we're absolutely going to be bringing more resource governance controls into the Server Management add-on. And last, we've also heard a lot around authentication, specifically mixed mode auth, whether it's different sites wanting to authenticate via different IDPs, having multiple identity stores. We want to make it more flexible for you based off of your overall IT infrastructure. But we need your help. So this is just a call for continuing to give us feedback, right? One of the core things, especially on behalf of, like, say, the engineering team or the product teams, we love talking to customers, right? We cherish the opportunity to kind of hear what's working well, what's not working well, what you would like to see in our product. So if you have feedback around what you want to see in Tableau Server or the resource or RMT or CMT or the Server Management add-on, please give us that feedback. We take it to heart, we treat it seriously, and we want to make sure that we're building things that work for you. So, Server Management add-on came out in 2019.3, has 5 main features: AWS KMS integration, external RDS support, what we call workload management, both for file store and backgrounders, and 2 tools, resource monitoring tool and content migration tool. Kind of talked about some of the benefits of these tools and some things for you to consider, as well as doing a deeper dive on RMT and CMT, and a quick preview of what we're thinking about next. And with that, I'm done talking. I would love to hear your questions at this point.